They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas. Our goal is to understand metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. Sending Poets. Because, after all, justice matters to us all. Otherwise, we fall. My name is John. With me is Bob and Tucker. Good morning, fellas.
Morning,
Good
guys.
morning. Another good one, John. Where's that from?
My wife and I wrote that this morning because I was like, I need a haiku for the justice episode. So we
Dang,
whipped
that's
that up this morning. Yeah. Yeah, so to follow up on last week's episode about liberty, this is going to be the justice episode. But real quick, just to some fun things about, how the universe lines up, in weird ways. Bob, I remember towards the end of last episode, you had shared a sentiment about hunger and, that you really find out a lot about yourself, right? If you're really subjected to hunger. And so it was interesting, just fun coincidence. After our episode, there wasn't really much going on. I was like, went to my spreadsheet of movies. I was like, oh yeah, Life of Pi. We've talked about that like a long time ago, and I haven't seen it in years and years. Like, I'll rewatch that. And there's this great line there in that movie that goes, hunger can change everything you ever thought you knew about yourself. So I thought that was a fun coincidence.
One of my favorite movies, by the way.
Yeah, definitely one that we'll come back to in one of these duality of mind movies. Yeah, brilliant writing, acting, everything.
Such a profound movie.
Yeah. So that was one thing. The second thing, again, just in the fun coincidences of timing, like 4 days ago, Veritasium did put out a video, and it's called "Why Democracy is Mathematically Impossible." How fun. We're talking about this, they're talking about this. Well, yeah, I mean, the election's coming up, makes sense, but, fun coincidence nonetheless. But there were a few things I really wanted to call out. I'm not trying to just rehash the video, obviously, but it was educational. I'll put a link to it because I would recommend checking it out. And so some of the things that were relevant to last week's conversation, about voting. Well, first of all, it's this term first past the post voting is just this basic thing. Just everyone votes for their one favorite, and the candidate with the most votes wins. It goes back to the 14th century. That's what we use for the electoral college. But a really interesting thing was this point that he makes in the video, that when there's more than two options, the winner oftentimes might not be the one that most people voted for. And it's kind of seems counterintuitive to say it that way, but he points to the 2000 election where it was between George W. Bush and Al Gore, but there was a third candidate, Ralph Nader, and this election came down really to Florida. If I kind of remember this, but in the video there's an interview with the guy, and he says that it really was this ridiculously small margin of 600 votes basically in Florida that came down to being the deciding factor. I think that was the year about the hanging chads. You guys remember that? Yeah. It was just it was a weird thing.
But I wouldn't get hung up, no pun intended, on the 600 votes. It was the fact that the differential
the third candidate
was let. No, it wasn't the third. I mean, it was, but essentially there's always going to be some error in counting, and the margin of error was greater than the difference between the two candidates.
So I kind of remember that. Yeah, or I kind of
millions.
Remember kind of, yeah. I mean, but the point he makes in the video, and this is called the spoiler effect, was that they were making this point that Ralph Nader got 100,000 votes in Florida, and a lot of people that voted for Ralph Nader had preferred Gore over Bush, and they were kind of left with this like, ah, shit, man, if it wasn't for Ralph Nader, we wouldn't have voted for Bush, we would have voted for Gore, and maybe that. So like this third candidate almost was like this deciding factor, So that was really interesting, and even it's called Duverger's law. It's just this like concentration of power down to like two options. So I thought that was just like really interesting, and then he goes on to explain this ranked choice voting mechanism, which we kind of started with that last episode, and I didn't know a ton about the mechanics of it, but it's also known as instant runoff or preferential voting. But it was explained in a really, easy to kind of digest way, and I kind of came up with my own example here. But basically, the winner just needs 50% plus one of the votes, so a majority. But the voters, instead of choosing their one favorite, they order the preference. This is my first favorite, my second favorite, my third favorite. After the first round, if no one has 50% plus one, then it's that lowest voted option gets eliminated, and the second votes from those, are filtered into the remaining candidates, and then you just keep going until someone gets 50%. So, like, in other words, if there's three options, apples, oranges, bananas, and there's 10 voters, and apples and oranges both get 4 votes for first, so now they're tied. By the way, I think this is similar to what you've mentioned a couple of times, Bob, about the Survivor thing. But then, but bananas, right? Bananas only had 2 votes out of the 10. But both people that voted for bananas first, their second choice was apples. So in this next round, the second votes for apples go to apples. Now apples has 6 of the 10 votes, and apples the winner. So that's kind of the idea of ranked choice voting. I think it goes back to the French Revolution, if I remember right. Like that's when people were, it was really encouraging actually to know, like, people have been thinking about this for a long time of like, what is the best, like, kind of most fair way to really, have a voting system, for governance. One of those people, this was a fun fact, Charles Dodgson. I didn't know that name, but I know his pen name, Lewis Carroll. So the guy that was, I don't know for sure that he was on acid, but you read Alice in Wonderland and it's like, oh yeah, this has to do with psychedelic experience for sure. Anyway, but he was also kind of working on, like, ways to do voting, options. So wrapping this up here though, the video is called Why Democracy is Mathematically Impossible.
And so one interjection here, which was, I think it was the mayoral race for Minnesota, or excuse me, for Minneapolis or something, I believe.
Yeah, it was because
aside from, here's what I'm sorry, John. Here's what I'm so interested in is the emergent effects of a change of structure. So everything I'm discussing, the idea of a third-party candidacy and the strategic and tactical paths forward to make it successful, etc., has nothing to do with changing the system itself, meaning the way the elections are run. But if one were to change the way the elections are run, I find it extremely fascinating what behavior implications there could be. So back to this mayoral race in Minneapolis,
it was ranked choice. It was ranked choice, like the I think the incumbent who was most likely doing, he kind of bowed out or decided he wasn't going to run. I think that was the thing. He decided he wasn't going to run again. So there was like 30. There was 35. There was like 35 candidates that were like, well, then I'll go for it, and they were going to do this ranked choice voting, and because it was very important to not just get the one vote, but also to be like, if you weren't the first pick, like you wanted to be the second pick, the higher, So the point of this thing it was very interesting. By the way, the guy that explains this in the Veritasium video, he's the guy who hosts a show called Connected on Netflix, which there's only like 5 or 6 episodes, but they were all really, really fascinating. But I'm pretty sure it was that same guy. Well, anyway, the point of this story was, um, you know, what we're used to, and this is what you're getting at, Bob, with like the behaviors that change. Like what we're used to is like this mudslinging, like shit talking kind of political, uh, you know, campaigning thing, right? And this was the opposite.
Because
So much so,
you don't necessarily have to earn their vote. You just want them not to vote for the other guy.
yeah, you want, yeah, right. And so much so that it was this opposite of like shit talking things. Like literally, there's a recording of all of these people singing "Kumbaya" together because they were just like all getting along. It
Not
was
metaphorically,
very literally
literally.
singing "Kumbaya." It was very interesting. So yeah, that I agree. That was just
But I
here,
think that
change the system and see how the behaviors change. Like it works. I mean,
yeah, it was emergent though, because nobody planned that intentionally.
yeah.
It
And by
just
the way, when I say like it works, I mean like the change works. I don't actually, they didn't even bother saying like here was the outcome. It was just the whole point of it was, in this thing where there was 35 people in ranked choice voting, um, this bizarre behavior where everyone was getting along,
well,
even to the point of singing "Kumbaya" instead
let me
of.
throw an opinion on this. Let me throw an opinion, which is the value of the mayoralship of Minneapolis is so minuscule that this is allowed to happen.
Like this
So
wouldn't happen with like a presidential election, you're saying?
I'm saying you would have so many people bought off. You'd have so many people have bowed out Ross Perot style because of blackmail. You'd have so many people die in random accidents. You'd have so many people commit suicide with 2 shots to the head. Whatever. I'm just saying the ferocity of a national winner take all, regardless of how you get there, whether it's ranked choice or first past the post or whatever. The fact is, if you get that executive position, you drive the boat, and there's so much at stake. Like you're not going to go into the World Series of Poker, Texas Hold'em tournament for whatever $10 million winner and have a bunch of casual players. You're going to have a bunch of sharks. You're going to have the sharkiest sharks of all come in and dominate that game because there's so much value attached. It's not a pickup game of basketball. It's the Olympics. You're going to have
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
a dream team come forth with the power of, if you're going to make it that easy for me to win, I'm just going to fuck you over. Because this is what we're talking about with politics. Not the people with the best ideas. It's the people with the least scruples and the highest level of motivation. This is a personal opinion now. I'm just talking out loud. That they want the power. So power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, who desires that level of power? People who are inherently okay with corruption. People who are hungry to have generational wealth and the intoxication. Okay, Kissinger says power is the greatest aphrodisiac. There's some people that are not just attracted, but they're wholly attracted to this concept of holding the keys of destiny in their hand. Let's go Lord of the Rings. Like the one ring.
Oh, right.
It is a gift that the hobbits have to not desire to use the ring. They're the only ones that can possess this thing. Tolkien didn't do that accidentally. There was a very real, metaphor embedded in that ring that, this is a guy who, learned from a world war, I think World War I, right? He was understanding about how corrupting that level of power is, and the people who desire the ring of power are precisely the ones you don't want to have it. So going back to this ranked choice, I love the concept. I think emergently it does create alignment such that people are organizing as if we are one giant team, singing Kumbaya, which is how we should be, because that's what we're doing here. We're trying to pick a leader of our team. We're not trying to divide us into 2 teams. But the practicality of that, I think, is limited.
Yeah.
When
Well, yeah, and that's almost where. Sorry to interrupt you, but back to again the title of this video, why democracy is mathematically impossible. So in 1951, this guy Kenneth Arrow, he kind of established, well, there's like 5 conditions that a fair voting system like must meet, and I didn't write them down, but again, I'd recommend watching the video, but basically 5 unique conditions. This means it's fair, and he was able to prove that ranked choice with 3 or more options is mathematically impossible to meet those 5 conditions. This is called Arrow's impossibility theorem. He got a Nobel Prize in economics for this in 1972. So like this is again, it's encouraging to me that like people have put a lot of effort into trying to think about this, and the takeaway for me is, yeah, it's complicated as shit. You know what I mean? Like I'm, know thyself. I'm much more interested in like the poetry of things, and but I am grateful that like people are like interested in this problem and trying to think of ways to solve it. For me, it's like I kind of like to tiptoe on the fringes of it and think about it, but at some point, it's just like, yeah, man, it's fucking impossible. Like this is like
I'm going to use this Lord of the Rings thing. I'm going to go here again.
Yeah, no, I like it. Yeah.
Here's my point. It takes a hobbit walking from the Shire to Mordor to defeat the Eye of Sauron.
Well, I think there's a secondary point here, is that the Hobbit didn't want to do it.
Agreed.
Right.
The Hobbit would much rather be at home in this little hobbit hole.
Yeah,
and I think to get meaningful change in government, we have to find a way to elect people who may not necessarily want the job.
Yeah, I can bring up a line from Dune. Like Atreides, the Duke of Atreides, is telling his son, he's like, my father told me a great man doesn't seek to lead, he's called to it, and he answers. Yep. And he tells his son, he's like, if your answer is no, that's fine, dude. You'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be, which is like my son. It's a really beautiful scene that I kind of butchered, but yeah, it's the same kind of thing, like where it's this abundance of humility, or whatever, that like really seems to be,
but imagine this,
a desirable factor here.
Imagine if you are the leader, but you do not define the planks of the platform. This is what I literally am trying to do this with this concept. So back to liberty. So liberty and justice are the 2 cornerstones. Liberty means we're agreeing to disagree. We are on the same team, but we don't all have to follow the same rules all the time. So the point being, the person who's running at the level of I want to lead this party and whatever is not the same person. And quite frankly, there's not one person picking a campaign promise. It is decentralized. It's the crowdsourcing of the planks of the platform. That's the key. So the person then who wants to lead that group is truly not in it for themselves, because they are not defining the path that they're going to take. They're defining how they would execute the path of the group.
Yeah.
So I think it's fully analogous to the Hobbit.
Yeah.
In that you have the fellowship and you have this group that says, we cannot allow this power to exist. We have to do this hard thing, but we entrust this one team or subset of the team to carry forth the burden, but it's not their idea. They're drafted. The hobbits are drafted into this fight. They don't want to be in the fight. And that's what I'm saying is in the model of how we would have a campaign, it is those people who feel compelled to carry the ring, but it's not their choice.
Right. Yeah, it's very, very interesting dynamic. I do love the analogy here. I think that'll serve us well. We should get into the justice thing. Just a couple final pieces from this Veritasium video. Just other types of voting. He didn't go into this like too detailed, but rated voting, approval voting. Rated voting is where voters just tick like all the options they approve of. There's no number kind of. It's just, but then again, he didn't kind of go further into that. And then approval voting. And that's where it's like you indicate, like, similar to like a lot of surveys and stuff these days, like, on the scale from strongly disapprove to strongly approve of, like doing that kind of stuff. So I think, that's interesting. Maybe that approval voting seems to be getting more traction, if I remember right in the video, that other places are kind of adopting it in certain areas. Okay, the last piece before we go into the justice thing was this quote. I figured for the end of the show we'll do another ChatGPT quote, but this was in the video and I thought it was just a pretty brilliant quote from Winston Churchill. It goes, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all other forms that have been tried."
Yeah.
So way to go, Winston Churchill. All right, but yeah, so yeah, let's dive into this like justice idea specifically. Well, I'll let you go where you pick up where you want, Bob. But I'm very excited about.
Let me poll the group and just see. I'll throw out there national defense just because that's low hanging fruit. Other than national defense, what would you both say is the next highest priority that a government, any government, not just U.S., but any government in the world, state, local, federal, any government that they're tasked with? If it's not national defense or defense of the borders from, external attack or what have you, what would be the most important thing that only the government does?
What would be or should be, or like for America specifically, you're asking?
Well, just conceptually. So a form of governance. So governance is leadership of the team. So you have a team, you have a group of human beings that are collectivizing.
Yeah.
And then they're specializing so that not everybody can call the play. Like, we're going to huddle up, we're going to call play. Well, if there's 11 people in the huddle and they each want to call their own play, I guarantee that play will not succeed because you're going to have 11 people going 11 different directions. So they're collectivizing into a team of 11 to hike the ball and run the play, but we're selecting one coach to call the play. So what I'm saying is, in the guise of what our system of governance is here to do, like advance the ball, score a touchdown. So score a touchdown is, obviously the primary thing. That's what we're all here to do.
What's the next thing? Yeah.
Well, in that guy. So obviously I'm just going to say take off the table of, warfare.
Gosh.
Okay. So warfare is one thing. We're all going to stipulate warfare is, it's got to be run by the coach or whatever. Other than warfare, what is the next highest priority that you guys think a body of governing human beings should be tasked with doing?
I think taking care of the well-being of the people is something I would throw out there myself. What about you, Tucker?
I'd break that into 4 or 5. So it would be law and order, public health, education, and infrastructure would probably be.
So now out of that,
I think where those fall as next in line is going to have to change over time based on the situation.
But you don't even have to go there. Just take that list that you just gave, which I think is a summary of John's generalized topic, and tell me what of those that you listed out, Tucker, could only be performed by a governance.
Law and order.
There you go. Okay. So what I'm getting at is an exclusive right, a monopoly on violence. So society is going to run best when there's a monopoly on violence held by the leadership of the team.
Monopoly on violence. Oh my God, it sounds like a song title. I needed to hear more. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean specifically? Like,
we all agree that we could. So if there is an act perpetrated, someone is found terribly murdered. Obviously, it's not a wild animal. Obviously, it's not self-inflicted. Obviously, it was not accidental. the society at whole has a vested interest in finding the person or persons who committed that act. And I'm saying that if you have a society that is not interested in finding the perpetrator, that society won't last very long. And if you use the mob mentality of burn the witches, so to speak, and let's just find somebody scapegoat and just destroy that person or people, that's not going to last long. So what we really want to do is find the actual perpetrators, and provide a mechanism to determine guilt or innocence, and then punishment that fits the crime, that is not vengeance and not, torture, and it's not above and beyond. It's somehow proportional. And what I'm saying is that one functionality of that chain of events, which is crucial to the stability of a team or a society, is held as a monopoly by one entity, and that is the government. So we don't have company A and company B both saying, look, I will find the criminal faster, I will prosecute more harshly, and I will punish them. No,
it's not like a subscription service. Like, oh wait, you didn't pay your last month's, subscription fee, so you have no justice. Yeah.
I mean, and you can also look at it. Let's just say firefighters or first responders in general. And say, look,
I've used that analogy with firefighters. Like, I'm happy to just throw my money, like, take care of this. I don't want to have to do research to find out which private fire department is the best one and read reviews and you know what I mean? Like, just take my money. Just do that. Just just figure that out. Please.
When your house is burning down and they're like, this credit card was declined, sir. Do you have another credit card that I could use before we, tap the hydrants and start performing CPR in your family?
Yeah.
So let's just, I mean, obviously we could say firefighters as well, but that's more of a localization. I think judicial scales up from local to state to federal. There is a level of this in the whole shooting match, but that's kind of what we're talking about, is a monopoly on a single service. That is, infrastructure might be probably a close one in there. I think infrastructure is probably in that realm where you don't have two companies competing, building an interstate highway next to each other. And mine's 5 lanes and yours is 6 lanes, but I will let you go 75 miles an hour. You only let them go 60 miles an hour. And I have a toll booth every 4 miles and yours is every quarter mile. I mean, so I would say there is a little bit of that. But what I'm trying to get to is, what are we doing here? Like, what are we really trying to do here? When we talk about government, what are we really talking about? Because there's so many campaign promises, and there's so many ways to try to either mudsling your opponent or earn your vote through payoffs. Like, if you vote for me, I'll give you this. If you vote for that other guy, he's going to give your enemy that. And there's these indirect ways that we're trying to determine who should be the coach of the team. And I'm saying, let's start over. So we talked about liberty at length. Now we're talking about justice. Justice should be blind. So first of all, it's a monopoly. We shouldn't have multiple layers of justice. We shouldn't have competing police forces and, this prison, does this kind of housing of criminals, and this prison, it's even worse than that, and whatever. No, we're trying to do one thing where we have granted a monopoly of power. So when the cops come to your house and you say, I don't want to go, they're going to come in and take you out. That's just it. They have the monopoly on power. If you're the one suspected of the crime and we have a judge that says there's probable cause and we have a search warrant, they get to come in. They're going to do violence upon you and your possessions if you block them from coming in. And we're okay with that. When normally we're not okay with violence. So I would say it's not okay for someone to break into your house. But I say it is okay for a bunch of uniformed officers to break into your house when they have a search warrant.
Yeah.
So it's a really core piece of society that we agree 2 ways. It's almost like warfare. So warfare is killing people. Well, murder is killing people too.
Right. What label are we using? Right.
We make a distinction here that as long as it's killing people who are attacking us or represent a threat, And as the whole, we train our guys to go shoot these silhouettes, and they don't think that they're actually killing human beings. They're just, doing what they've been conditioned to do. Well, that's okay. We're dropping bombs from 30,000 feet and we don't see the blown up body parts on the ground. That's okay. If we're pushing a button on a controller in Arizona and a drone is unleashing a Hellfire missile on somebody in Pakistan, that's okay. That's not murder. That's warfare. So there's distinctions here. And obviously I'm using a lot of these facetiously, but the point is we want to limit the feeling of acceptance of applying violence to solve problems.
Yeah, right.
So it's not okay for anybody to use violence to solve problems other than
except for here, but but like we want to be careful about what are the exceptions, like
ultra careful. So what I'm getting at is the justice side of governance is paramount. And so before I go farther, please allow me to have you read some of these budgetary figures, if you don't mind, John. Please read some of the budgetary figures about our investment in this crucial component of society that only our government is authorized. They have a monopoly on this level of violence. What's our level of funding?
Is that the 5.6 trillion?
No, that's our budget. So that's our national budget for the federal government. But what is the part pulled out just for the judicial branch? So we have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch of governance. So in the judicial branch, what is our budget?
It's kind of cut off here. Is this the 9 trillion, almost 10 trillion? Or is that still, I apologize, dude. I'm not like, I'm not hitting, I think, exactly what you're
Let me try to
asking me to pick up here.
I'm on my phone, but I will do this.
The judiciary's discretionary request, is that what you're talking about?
All right, so we're looking at a budget of $9.9 billion.
Okay, yes. My bad.
So out of the government spent $5.6 trillion in fiscal year 2024 to ensure the well-being of the people of the United States. So $5.6 trillion. The federal budget requested for fiscal year 2024 was $9.9 billion.
Gotcha.
Which equals 0.1785%. So let me say that again. I know there's a lot of numbers. So out of the entire budget of the federal government, of which there are three branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And we just talked about the crucial role of the judicial in society. The percentage of budget associated to the judicial was 0.1785%.
And this is the amount of money going towards that effort of being careful about what are these exceptions, right? I mean, not specifically or exclusively murder, but these are what we agree are the
monopoly
laws.
Of violence, the whole shooting match of trying to find the criminals, separate the innocent from the guilty, and then apply a punishment to the guilty.
Yeah.
That entire role of what we authorize in government.
Less than a percent.
Less than 0.2%.
It is kind of absurd.
It is absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. Now think about the other things we talked about. Education, say healthcare, even infrastructure, all these other things. There's a commercial component to these that they don't have to. I'm not making an argument either way. I'm just saying there is a way to get private citizens to provide education and healthcare and support for food and building bridges and all these things, even space flight, satellites, all these important other things. There's a pathway on all of these other things that humans can select voluntarily to put forth as their life's effort some sort of work to satisfy those needs. And I'm saying I can't just make a badge, strap on a gun, and go start policing my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Nor should I.
Right.
Nor should
Yeah.
Nor should anybody else. Because what happens is, this is why monopoly is so important. If I think gentleman X is guilty of something, if I think that that person is guilty, but they're not, or if someone else thinks I'm guilty, but I'm not, we're going to have a war on our hands. Because two people might disagree on who's the guilty party. And so we kind of have to have this way. Otherwise, we're going to break into anarchy. So back to the point at hand, I would propose a political party that elevates justice to the highest level on equivalence with liberty. So to me, I don't even want to live in a system of governments where I'm not free. So if there's a system of governance that someone proposes, but I lose my freedom over it, and maybe we all are more prosperous, or we live a longer life, or we get more stuff done every day, or whatever, I don't care. If I don't get to be free, I'm not going to go ahead willingly. By definition, I think that's what that means. It's like I'm not free to go ahead willingly. So I need my liberty. I also need my justice. I need to know that we have a monopoly on violence. I'm not going to randomly have someone come to my house and try to impose their concept of justice upon me such that I have to defend myself, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And it's fundamental to stability of society for these two bedrock propositions to be fully elevated to the highest position. So we can clearly see that in our current state of affairs, and I also bring up, maybe like Jeffrey Epstein. So even though we're not funding this institution, we do have a functioning judiciary branch. There are prisons, there are police officers, there are judges, there are attorneys. But are they doing a good job, even with the money they have? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say there's corruption in the system. I'm going to say that there's two systems, haves and have-nots, and it's applied, the level of justice is applied differently depending upon what category you fall into. So without jumping down the Epstein rabbit hole, where he did not kill himself, obviously, but the Epstein rabbit hole, I'm going to use that as a broad brush to just say there's corruption in the system as it is. We talked prior about the importance of getting to the Senate, because the Senate is the body that confirms Supreme Court justices and other federal bench nominees. And that's really the proxy for what executive level elections have boiled down to, is who's going to get the judges on the bench, because that's where the action's happening. Because we have a stalemate on the legislative side, and we can't get anything new. It's all continuing resolutions. It's all, agree to just keep this thing rolling forward without actually doing anything on the legislative side. So my point is the fight strategically is all about trying to get to the judiciary, but we can see how preposterously underfunded it is. Where's due process? Where's a speedy trial?
Well, here's the thing. The budget for that is there, but it's been privatized. So, little statistic. In 2022, the top 100 law firms in the U.S. earned $131 billion, which is about 100 times more than the budget for the judiciary.
Agreed.
And I think that's where you're going to with this idea that you're going to propose, right, Bob?
Correct.
Because exactly. The problem now is the justice system is just a function, not 100%, but it's largely a function of wealth and what kind of legal representation you can buy.
Why is it so valuable? By the way, if we're talking about real truth, so justice to me is objective truth, as best we can find that. I know that's a vanishingly small distinction there, but meaning that trying to find true objective truth is maybe a fool's errand. But the best that these humans can come up with, why is it so valuable to have certain attorneys compared to other attorneys? If not, that the outcome can be directed by the attorney themselves.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
So Tucker, you got there a different path. I like the way you took that path. I never looked up that imbalance of expenditures, meaning as a budgetary line item for the federal government, it's so minuscule, it's embarrassing. But in reality, the cost of justice or the legal system is expensive. So running prisons is a lucrative game.
Sure.
Using prison labor is a lucrative game. Being an attorney is a lucrative game. Being elected or appointed to a judicial bench is a lucrative game. Why? Why are these so lucrative? Well, the outcome can be controlled by the humans in the chairs.
Yeah.
Which should not have any implication, in my opinion. If we're going to do real justice,
it's objective, not subjective. Like that's the idea,
John.
Right?
Thank you. That's the idea. So the idea is we get to the truth,
right?
And the truth should not matter if one person. So it shouldn't be a debate. So when we talk about debate, I take pro, you take con, Tucker, and then on a given proposition, and then we could switch. I could take con, you could take pro, and we could have a polling of the audience and see who compels the biggest change in opinion in the audience itself. That's a real thing. That's a literal thing where we can compel based on rhetoric and argumentative style alone, not the reality. We're not talking because I took pro and then I could take con.
Yeah.
And so, or I could just take a random one of the two, which is what should happen. So if we're going to try to find out who's the best debater, we have a given proposition and you prepare for pro and con. The day of the event, you pick a number out of the hat. You get pro, I get con. Now we go. So you have to be ready to argue both sides.
Yeah.
That's not truth.
It's very interesting to think about. But it's the reality of like what happens. I mean, opening arguments, closing arguments. It's all about, like you mentioned before we start recording, 12 Angry Men. I do want to go like watch that because I've heard good things. But yeah, it's this.
Why was there? Let's do a callback to O.J. Simpson.
Right.
A dream team of attorneys.
Right.
I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of O.J. Simpson, but the point is, there was a wealthy person who was able to receive an inordinate amount of legal and expert support for their side of the game.
And then they were acquitted. They were.
And the state had their resources and they were outmatched.
Yeah.
But that is not the typical.
They were outmatched by a rhyme. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Alliterative justice is the most powerful justice, my brother.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Johnny Cochran, by the way. Rest in peace, my brother.
Oh, man.
By the way, that's just a side note. That's the beginning of the Kardashian franchise.
Sure. Yeah.
Strange in and of itself, but that's for another day. But the point is this. The point is, what I would like to see is an effort to get to truth. And here's my proposition. I presume that what we want is akin to the military style of governance, such that there are ranks.
Yeah.
So a beginning entry-level crime calls for an entry-level attorney team, both on prosecution and defense, such as privates, sergeants, lieutenants. So if you're going to go into a basic court, and by the way, well-funded, so half the battle is just funding these institutions so we have enough due process so people are not languishing in prison or jails, for multiple years pending trial, not having a speedy trial, not having an adequate defense, not having an overwhelmed prosecutorial body that is incapable of even doing their job however well their heart is positioned to do so. So lack of resources, having immigration courts languishing for years, if not decades, having just an immense imbalance in the ability to do legal lawfare corporate style. So if you are a small business compared to a behemoth like Amazon or Microsoft or Google, you have no chance in court. They can just bankrupt you with legal fees. They don't have to lose. So this imbalance in power through lawfare being just a terminology of using the law to create a warfare footing.
Yeah.
That imbalance itself negates justice, law and order, such that the system is rigged for those who are haves and rigged against those who are have-nots. So back to this concept of a military style. So imagine you want to be involved in the legal system. You want to be an attorney, a defender, you want to be an attorney, a prosecutor, or you want to be on the bench as a judge. One of those three paths forward. I propose the government does not allow for private defense. It provides all parties equal competent defense commensurate with the level of the offense itself, such that people without means have adequate defense and people with means do not have overpowered defense.
Yeah.
And so as you start, let's just say you rob you're accused of robbing a newsstand of a magazine. Well, that should be quick and easy. We're just going to go through and you get a low level, junior green public defender and public prosecutor, and you're in a lower level court. It's quick and easy. As you move up the ranks, assault, rape, murder, etc., the more higher level crimes, everybody will get a captain or a general level, going back to the military concept, a high ranking defender and prosecutor.
And the only way that those people get to those ranks is by working through it, correct? Like, it's not like you can be appointed that or apply for that general level position without having that private experience and the lieutenant experience, and right? I mean, that's kind of
Correct.
the idea here.
So we don't have an F-16 pilot who gets hired by a company to bomb their opponent's building. You don't get to just hire an F-16 pilot to come in and drop a 2,000-pound bomb on the corporate headquarters of the guy you're fighting in court against. That doesn't make any sense. We have a appropriate use of force by experts, and they are not compensated differently depending upon what mission they're flying. They don't get to be a mercenary. So in the big metaphor, what I'm saying is we have a mercenary system of legal combatants. I like that. Legal combatants. Mm. And I mean that in not that they're legally able to do combat. I'm saying they do combat in the legal sense.
Yeah.
So we have mercenaries that are able to get the guilty to go free and apply disproportionate punishment to those who are incapable of defending themselves due to lack of economic means.
Yeah, currently that's what it is. It's more of a mercenary type thing.
Correct. It's exactly a mercenary type thing. And then once you get to the bench, meaning the judicial system of appointing judges and judges going through campaigns, it's not a function of the best minds, not a function of the best meritorious justices out there. It's a function of political power, connectedness, campaign finances.
Can we dig into that a little bit more, like currently? Because I mean, like, I know there's like the Supreme Court justices, and there's like 9 of them, I think, right? But lower like judges, like what is the current how does a judge become a judge in like a lower? By the way, I do have a side carrot about traffic court I'd like to get into eventually, but
Are you
yeah,
talking state or federal?
yeah, let's start at the state level. Yeah.
State level, my understanding is you would have an election. So on your ballot,
Oh
and a lot of
yeah.
times it's nonpartisan, so they're not ROD. They're just running for an open county judicial seat or a position. Now there are like higher level courts of appeal that I am not familiar with on the state level, if they are appointed by the governor and then voted upon by the state senate or not. But my understanding is there would be an election for most judicial seats at the state and local level. You'd have an election, usually nonpartisan, so they're not allowed to say they're Democrat or Republican. Then you would have at the federal level a appointment by the executive office and then confirmation by the Senate. And so you would have these federal courts and federal courts of appeal, circuit courts and Supreme Courts that are, I think they're called Article 3 courts that are essentially lifetime appointments without oversight, but it's a function of politics, meaning whoever has the majority in the Senate and whoever holds the executive branch is able to put in whomever they choose into the seat. There is no qualification. There is no requirement of being an attorney for X number of years or having, a certain law scholarship background of credentials. So we
like the way it is in the military, where like to get to the general level or the admiral level, right? Like you do have
you're
to
going to
have
be
all that.
promoted. You're going to be promoted, and you're promoted based on your time and your commendations.
So I say there's also a merit factor in there too, right? It's not like, oh, everybody once they serve this many years they just automatically are promoted to this level. There is a merit.
You are not guaranteed any promotion. Now, people would strive for promotion because you're in the military to increase your rank. Let's say the goal of there's an enlisted and then there's non-commissioned officers. So there's also commissioned officers, but there's points of, why are you in it? And rarely are people in the military in order to get rich. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to disentangle the prospect of great wealth from the legal system. I think we have to break its back, plain and simple. Break the back of the mercenary legal system and create a structured governmental system where you're not in the government in order to get rich. You're not here to become wealthy beyond belief.
Right. It's public service, I mean, like truly, it's like public service.
Right.
You
are a servant of the people. You should only be here. And by the way, this is what I'm trying to get to. Self-selection bias. I don't want the attorneys to be involved because they like having cameras on them and wearing $3,000 suits.
Yeah.
I don't want a guy with a good haircut and a smooth talk to elevate themselves so that they're on billboards throughout your city.
Yeah.
Trying to get somebody who was in a car accident to contact them now. This is such a corruption. This mercenary system is such a corruption of this cornerstone of justice. And it shocks me to my core that we as a group, and I'm just saying generally speaking, are not up in arms about this thing right now. It should be elevated to the highest order of priority, because how can we move forward, going back to Epstein, how can we go back to any of these financial crises, whether it be Enron, whether it be 07, 08, whether it be the inability to apply Securities and Exchange laws fairly across the board, meaning insider trading for me, but not for thee, is what it feels like from our governance, where if you have a group of individuals collectively share information on a subreddit, a la Wall Street Bets, and try to make a play on GameStop, in that they see that this stock has been overshorted 140% of the float, and they want a short squeeze. They're prevented from doing so, but any hedge fund that identifies the same exploits in the market is free to do so. I know we got a little bit off topic there, but the point is not having, it's like, let them eat cake. It's this Marie Antoinette quote, right?
Oh, yeah.
True. Of, the peasants, they have no bread. Well, let them eat cake. It's this mindset of two systems that are so crazily off kilter, but they're both running simultaneously over the same group of people, that I fear a major breakdown. And I would like to prevent a breakdown, not go from one breakdown to the next, to the next, to the next. So this is why I think it's core to a third party run, is to have a concept that the average American could rally around in order to protect themselves and remove the special protection from the haves, from the have-nots.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the idea. I had not thought of it. Well, again, this isn't like my general wheelhouse of interest anyway, so whether I would have thought about this or anything along these is probably like a low chance. But the idea of the government, analogous to the military, the justice system, with like promotions through these ranks, through the actual jobs. So a question for like in this system, would there still be maybe like 9 Supreme Court justices, like at the highest level, like a small number, or do you think that number gets bigger, or like have you thought about that angle of it? Because I think one of the things that I kind of briefly talked about this with my wife, and it's the appointment of the highest level judges piece. It's just like seems fraught with issues or whatever, right? But in the promotion type of thing, well, still, if there's only like 9 at that like most highest position, do they still go through some type of appointment to consider that promotion is like granted or whatever? Like how, and what I'm getting at is, it seems like in some ways the same problem might be there if it's still up to certain people to say, yes, I'm confirming this person can be at this most highest level, even if it is like through promotions. Do you see a similar kind of potential issue there? That how do we address that? You know what I mean?
Great question. Let me start with the analogy once again to the military real quick. Imagine the number of lives taken or saved, depending upon your point of view, by our military personnel over the last, let's say, since World War I. So since World War I, how many lives have been ended due to choices made by generals and admirals?
Right, like just countless.
50 million, 100 million, ballpark, somewhere in that. I'd say probably, let's just say 50 million. And I'm not talking just like, guy wearing a uniform gets blown up. I'm saying burning entire cities, dropping
Yeah,
nukes,
yeah. Say the decision of,
blockade, starvation, disease, strife, in that we destroy working civilizations, and now criminality is rampant, rapes, robberies, murders. So my point is, these people, you know where I'm going, these people are not elected. The people who hold the bombs, not the trigger to the bomb, let's just say the executive branch has the nuclear football and they get to decide. But the people who have possession of the nukes, the literal people who have possession of hydrogen bombs, we don't elect them. They're not under our control. We don't even know their names. We don't know their faces. We don't know where their families live. We don't know where their bank accounts are. So the real power does not have to be, in my opinion, does not have to be derived from the system at hand that we think is accountable. But now back to the pointed question. I think I made the point, but the pointed question of what happens at the Supreme Court, I'll say two things. Number one is there's a constitutional requirement of how we legally get to the Article 3 judges. And so it's an appointment of a nominee by the executive and a confirmation by the Senate. And so there, I don't believe, off the top of my head, there is not an exact enumeration of the number of Supreme Court justices, nor a number of circuits. So obviously we didn't have California and like Ninth Circuit at the founding of the country. So there has been an expansion. I believe it's within the legislative branch's power and purview to create the size and scope of all these Article 3 justices and judges, and then staff them with as many sitting judges as they choose. So I don't think it's finite in that there's supposed to be 9. I don't believe 9 is in the Constitution.
Okay.
I believe that it's just in the Constitution that a legislative branch will create a judicial branch, a component of the judicial branch. Obviously, the Supreme Court's not the whole thing, but they will create at the federal level these federal districts or circuits and staff each one with a certain number of judges, and those will be confirmed by the Senate from nomination by the executive, I believe. So I don't think there's any way to change that without changing the Constitution. Second point, everything I've been talking about up till now is about grassroots. It starts with 3 states, and I do that on purpose.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody who is conceiving of a third-party run to get the presidency, or a third-party run to change the Constitution, or a third-party run to upend the Supreme Court has any credibility in my mind. I think it has to be built like you would build a house. You have to have a foundation of that house. You have to start with cornerstones, build a foundation, build the strong infrastructure. Eventually, you'll put some siding on it. Eventually, you put some plumbing inside and electricity and etc. But that's at the very end. So I don't have an answer for what to do, quotation marks, with the Supreme Court. I think what I would want to see is a state and local system crafted under this model of civil servants performing judicial acts and acts under the law that are in line with what we would consider military performance, where we compensate these people adequately that are doing extremely important jobs, life and death, but they're not in it for the money.
Right.
They're not in it to get rich and crazy rich and 10x the budget of the federal judiciary rich. Like, that's not what they're there for.
Right.
These people are not going to go do private to public and public to private back and forth. This is a huge problem with our governance, by the way, is we appoint or elect people who have private party experience to go to public office, and then they bounce back out to private business and get paid, or vice versa. They start inside the government and then go out to private office and then come back into governance and get paid. So there's a lot of political action committees, PACs. There's a lot of lobbying. There's a lot of rules and regulations at the regulatory sense, deep state concept of, the people who are established in the governance as bureaucrats. They're not elected, and they're holding the levers of power consistently, regardless of who comes and goes at the election cycle level. So I would say the fundamental path forward would be proof of concept. So take 3 states, allow these 3 states to adapt their judicial system accordingly. So imagine I don't know each of the states' constitutions regarding their state judicial system, but imagine we have to amend a state's constitution to allow for a judicial system to move forward like I'm describing. I don't think that's possible to amend this U.S. Constitution at this point, let alone
certainly not like, I like how you said it's like building a house. And I mean, is any house built in a single day? Like, it's all about, the iterations and stuff. So yeah, that it does make a lot more sense in my mind thinking about it that way, like starting somewhere. Proof of concept, that's how a lot of things are, that's how a lot of change is affected, is not just trying to be like, well, we just got to like totally gut it tonight and tomorrow we'll do it a new way.
Correct.
Like, that doesn't seem reasonable at all. So yeah, no, I love the idea of like trying something, knowing, like, so to answer my own question, like, how do you handle these, the appointment at this level? What do you mean in like 50 years when this has been going? Yeah, like that's basically what I was asking you. Like in 50 years, I just threw 50 out of nowhere, but like the whole point is like there'll have been iterations like that. The time to answer that question isn't now, really. Doesn't mean we can't talk about it, but like when the time comes, there'll be all of this like experience from trying this proof of concept, and that experience will make that question easier to answer. It'll be more reasonable to answer it at that time versus trying to figure out everything right now. I mean, this is like a tenet of the agile methodology that I'm such a huge fan of. The previous thing was like in software development was like waterfall and really trying to figure everything else out first before even like building things. You know what I mean? And then you get to the end of and part of the reason that I think all this makes so much sense to me is because of the advancement of technology. You really just can't compete these days with that waterfall methodology. You have to be more agile. You have to be willing to like, what is the minimum viable product? What is the realistic thing that we can work on now to learn from, so we can like do the next iteration with that knowledge and get better on the next iteration and better on the next iteration and better on the next iteration. So, that all lines up now beautifully in my mind with this idea that, it's not about trying to figure it all out before you do the first thing.
I love that terminology. And let me just expound on that just a little bit, which is the difference between forward deduction and backward induction.
Yeah.
So
see, everything comes back to this model.
I know, it's so scary. Give me 5 minutes, I could turn anything back into conscious and subconscious. But being forward deductive means you're taking a specific thing and you're trying to find the generality of the thing. And it's very difficult to do that indefinitely. Mm-hmm. Each layer has to be right moving forward, whereas backward induction is taking a generality and inducing a specific example of it. So we set a principle. We set these principles about how we're prioritizing governance, what governance means, decentralizing the decision making to create planks of a party platform and having a given applicant, if you will, someone who's trying to receive the votes to be the governor or senator or executive branch nominee, etc. Those people should be applying their skill set on how to implement what has already been agreed upon. So we're deleveraging the motivation of being able to make their own party plank on the fly, being nominated before the convention, as it were, where they get to make promises. Because why would you want to have an executive leadership role if not? I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about the quote unquote bad ones. If you're allowed to put forth, this is what I will spend the common money on, and obviously I'm going to give money to my supporters, I'm going to take money away from my enemy's supporters. Who does that motivate to run for those offices?
Mm.
Obviously, it's the people who want the power. It's the non-hobbits. Okay, we
Yeah,
want the
right.
hobbits who are impervious to the ring of power.
Yeah.
They don't feel its effects. Now, obviously, the weight still burdens them, like Frodo and all the rest. So we
Yeah,
do
I
have
mean, you have Gollum. I mean, like he was
Sure.
kind of consumed by it, so it's not
Nobody's
a
immune.
black and white thing, right? Yeah, nobody's totally immune, but there's something about they don't even explain that. It's in the first movie. Galadriel's like, "Why the Hobbit?" and Gandalf's like, "I don't really know, but there's something about him. It's fucking,
Well,
it's really cool." But anyway,
I think it goes back to how nice the Shire is and how peaceful and placid their enjoyment of it is, where they're not in a continuous, like the realm of humans is continuously trying to grow. It's a forever expansion. It's elves as well, etc., all the way, where you have this expansionist mindset of growing and growing and growing, whereas the hobbits are satisfied with what they've got,
yeah,
which is a uniquely unhuman trait. But that's my point, is when you get the ring of power, but you already have what you want, which is a little hobbit hole. You already have, and so being satisfied with that, meaning being a public servant. So we're talking about a servant class mindset, someone who is giving back. They're planting trees for the future,
right,
as opposed to consuming the trees for the present. And these are trees in which the shade they will never sit under.
right,
And so that's who I'm trying to empower. I'm trying to find out how can we create an emergent population of governors who do not want it for themselves. And the take-home message is you will always get people who want it for themselves when you incentivize people to have power for themselves.
Mm.
And so making a rule set is the game theory optimal way to do that. You have to make the rule set. But I have not talked once about it. An individual person I think would be good for this system. I would not put myself in this classification. I would make zero rules myself. Meaning,
yeah,
I wouldn't make any party platforms. I would disentangle my own political views from this entire process. It's immaterial. What I'm talking about is a rule set. I want to help make rules that empower a network effect of like-minded individuals to troubleshoot and crowdsource a solution for this complicated 21st century system of governance that we have, and allow for an emergence of people who are civil servant minded or military, rank and file minded, that aren't looking for their own personal self aggrandizement and self satisfaction in a monetary sense. I think that's what we need, and it starts with the grassroots. Excuse me. It starts
yeah.
with the foundation level.
Yeah, I love it because it's a unique idea. Like I said, I had never heard that before, and I was also thinking, Tucker, you kind of teased this earlier about like sometimes these problems that just seem like so complicated for humans. Well, maybe this is where AI can like get involved, and maybe I don't know if I would suggest like just let AI do it, but like together, like use it as a tool to get, like I think there's some potential there. You know what I mean? For using it like in a good way to recognize like there's only so much like humans can do this problem of because Bob, you were saying about values, and well, you didn't use the word values, but there was something where I was like, yeah, and like how do we come up with those? Oh, voting. Oh yeah, right. Voting is complicated as shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So yeah, I like this idea that maybe AI could like get involved in some of this thing too,
I agree. And I think at even the highest levels, because like I look at the Supreme Court now and I looked up these stats while we were talking about other stuff, but just over 30% of registered voters in the U.S. are registered Democrat, and about 27% are registered Republican. So currently we have about a third of the country that we can say are on the right, registered Republicans, yet they control 2/3 of the Supreme Court seats.
Oh, I see where you're going. Yeah, interesting.
And how is that an effective system? It's one that leads to corruption, and it's when you have corruption at the highest levels of the judiciary, the system's broken. And we can see that clearly in the bribes that have come to light being taken by Supreme Court justices. I mean, the system's broken.
Right.
And you have rich people who can get away with rape and murder through legal warfare. And on the other side, you have somewhere between, and the fact that we can't even pin this number down, but there's somewhere between 90,000 and 400,000 rape kits sitting in storage without the budget for them to be tested.
Exactly.
Wait a sec. This is new to me. What, rape kit? Or maybe it's just like, oh
where
yeah,
they
but
have
right now,
taken DNA evidence from a rape victim, but never processed that DNA or run it through a database.
Oh my God.
Because
resources.
Because we don't have the resources.
Because we spend less than 0.2% of the federal budget, which again goes back to that idea. Yeah, like the brokenness is like, it shouldn't be a the political thing is a privatized thing. If it's these two parties are private, well, just don't include that. Like, yeah, go back to this Bob's idea here. Like, the judicial system is just like the military. It's a monopoly on. It's interesting that you said monopoly on violence. Again, I think that would be a great. Tell Tria well that Tucker, you guys should write a song called Monopoly on Violence or whatever. But like, yeah, like that it shouldn't. That does make more sense to be more restricted, I guess it might be the word I'm looking for.
Well, and here's another stat I just looked up. So we don't have the budget to process 400,000 rape kits, and that those years go back from like 2014 through 2022 is where those 400,000 are.
Wow.
But we have the budget to process 1.5 million DUI tests a year.
Oh. Okay, so this goes back to traffic court. Can I share my story here?
Yes,
please.
About I mean, I don't actually know if there's a moral. It's my experience, and I was dumbfounded when I left. And I should have wrote it all down because I don't think I'll remember all of it. But it was a speeding ticket on a street that I've driven multiple times, but always like in the evening. And so I didn't actually know there was a school zone there, but I was going like 35 through a school zone. So I got a speeding ticket. And because it was a school zone, I had to go in person. I couldn't do anything like over the internet or mail or whatever. So I had to go in person to sit with a whole bunch of other people. It was like, it's like batch processing. It's like a whole bunch of people went into this room. I don't know if this is common across the country. Again, this is my first experience, and it was 10 years ago. Shit, maybe something like that. But we all sit in this room. There's like a TV screen, traffic court, and you know what I'm saying? Like, here's we're just gonna give you like the nitty gritty of like, these are your rights. You can choose to have a trial over this traffic court ticket. If I remember, that was kind of the gist. Or, and this kind of ties in with Bob, your example of the low level offenses. This should be quick, get it in and out, right? This is what I was experiencing, was like, or instead of like making a big deal about it, which is your right, we can appoint you a public defender, or you can sit here and watch this video and wait for your turn, and somebody is like has your case file or whatever, And when you come up, the judge is going to be like, you can plead guilty to this other offense, this smaller offense. You can plead guilty, pay a fine, and be done today. And that's what I did. I pled guilty to driving with a headlight out or some shit, which is not the truth, right? I was speeding through a school zone. But in order to speed it up, I guess, that's how I understand it, it was like, yep, I'm going to plead guilty to this lower offense and pay this fine, and now I'm done with it. And that in itself, I think, is kind of dumbfounded because, like, clearly the importance of truth. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I don't actually remember, like, does my record show that this was the ticket, but this is what I pled to? For sure, like, I know that there was points taken off my license or whatever that were a lower amount because I pled to this lower offense. Like, so that's for sure, like, in the system, right? But I don't know for sure if it's like, but yeah, the actual ticketed offense was this and the pled guilty offense, hopefully, because that seems more like accurate and truth. But this weird leap to, like, I'm going to plead guilty to doing something I didn't do. I'm lying. I'm like, and everybody's okay with this, but I'm like, this is not what happened, but I'm going to say that I did, so I can keep it going, so I can keep the machine moving and, like, go on with my day. Okay, so that's dumbfounding in itself. But the really crazy thing to me, and this is the part where the details, because it was so absurd, on the way home even, I think I kind of forgot, like, because I was trying to explain to Kim, like, this is what it is. It doesn't make sense. But it was something like another person that was there, she was, again, it was a big group. You just wait your turn, right? And when her turn came up, I'm pretty sure that the ticketed offense wasn't in a school zone, but it was like, I don't know, going like 65 and like a 40 or some shit. It was like really, like, fast. Okay. She decided not to take the plea deal. And the judge, I remember, was like, so you want this public defender kind of person? She's like, well, I have, and I think she was with her dad. And she's like, I have someone else who's going to look at this. And he's like, okay, you can choose your own counsel or whatever. I believe that's how it went. So they're like, okay, well, we'll go and, they'll hash it out with the people doing the plea bargains and stuff. And it was like, okay, so I remember thinking, like, that's weird. Okay, so then her turn came back up before mine came up because, okay, we rehashed something. Here's this. And the judge is saying this in front of everybody, right? And he's like, so, your person saying that the ticket that you should have gotten was actually worse because it was some weird technicality thing. So it's like, you realize that he's saying the ticket you got in the first place was wrong. It should have been this other ticket. And he's like, the minimum, points is like, I don't know, it's twice as many as the one you got. The minimum fine is twice. This is like a worse. She's like, yeah, I understand that. I remember thinking, a guy next to me, we kind of looked at each other with this puzzled look, like, way to go. Like, why are you doing this? Okay, so that's a new ticket, though. So now it has to go get plea bargained again. And somehow the plea bargain that came back when she came up the third time, because all this happened before I got my turn, the plea bargain was better than the original plea bargain on the original ticket. It was the most bizarre thing. So it was less points and less fine, because somehow she negotiated a way to get a higher ticket. It was, I swear, I'm telling you, it doesn't make sense, but I'm sure it was something very similar to that, where I'm like, this doesn't make any sense at all. This is just total, like.
What if I told you, John? What if I told you that the nonsensical nature of the legal system is the point?
It is, absolutely.
What, to, like, discourage people from, like, because it
No.
worked? Oh, okay.
Like,
it discouraged me. Like, I keep my eye out for
use,
the school zones now. Not that I didn't before, but
This is a really, really cool avenue of thought. But let me start with this first part, which is, and I'm not trying to disparage Christianity. I'm just using this because it's the closest that I know of. I'm sure this happens with all legal texts or any form of widely shared dogma, is that you can argue anything in any which direction if you have a big enough rule book. So if you make a rule book, like, let's just say the Bible is a rule book, and if you have a rule book with enough rules, some of them are self-contradictory.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's got to be this, like, situation where it's like, this one doesn't make sense against this one because they're contradictory. But I get you.
There's no way humanity is so complex. There's no way to have consistency throughout in a dogmatic sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So the same thing goes with the law, that why do lawyers make so much money? Why is it such a
It's about
valuable?
because they can exploit the fringe cases.
There you go.
And they can create new ones. And the Bible does the same way. I mean, one of the first rules in the Bible, thou shalt not kill. And then later on, well, I mean, clearly, if you see your neighbor working on the Sabbath, you should stone him to death.
Yeah, right.
You know, like
just technically, I think there is a translation issue. It's thou shalt not murder. So this goes back into the difference between murder and killing, meaning we have riflemen in a army platoon. They're not murderers; they're killers. So there is a distinction there that it's a translation issue. But I think the point is valid in that you have a really complex system that if you pay somebody who knows it well enough, they can navigate the ins and outs and find the edge cases and create new ones, or doubt of edge cases, or doubt of whatever should be a common sense ruling to get their way. And so my point is, what I envision is justice, which means accurate and faithful representation of the laws. And because we don't have justice right now, our laws are bullshit. So what we need are two things. We need justice, which is accurate and faithful representation of the laws, and we need better laws. But you're not going to get better laws without justice, because the point of bullshit laws, all these laws on the books, there's no getting rid of old laws that are nonsensical, or reevaluating current laws. There's loopholes, there's carve outs, there's exceptions, there's lobbying that gets laws in one person's favors, regulatory capture. There's so much exploitation of the legal system because there's no justice. If we all were held to account, by the way, I'm not saying I'm innocent. I've sped, I've broken laws. I would hate to be on the other side of that where I get caught and it would be painful to me. Okay. So full disclosure, I'm not an angel. But if I knew, if I broke a law and the law was real, not a bullshit law, a real law, and I got caught and I was going to be held to account for it, that might induce me to behave differently. That might get me to actually comply and not be a scofflaw, thinking that these laws are bullshit and I probably won't get caught. And if I do get caught, I'll wiggle my way out because I have means and I'm able to hire an attorney, and I don't have a criminal record and I'm not of a disadvantaged class and blah, blah, blah. So what I'm saying is humans will subconsciously modify their behavior to exploit the weaknesses of the game rule set that they find themselves playing in.
So go back to the Morpheus moment of like, what if I told you, how did you say it again? Like the nonsensical, that's the point of it. I forget how you said it.
The point is that it's anyway, it's open to interpretation, John. The whole point is it's all about interpretation. So they want the legal system, they meaning the creators of the legal system, want it so cumbersome and murky and have an ability to go through these machinations where they get the outcome they desire through manipulation of the knowledge of the edge cases. They want that. They want a two-tiered system. One is where if you know all the rules inside and out and how to apply them, we can get anybody off. And if you have someone who's fallen under the jurisdiction of the legal system who has no knowledge, we can do whatever we want to them. So think of Big Brother. Think of 1984. The whole point is to have a legal system and a complete information awareness of all people at all times, that you can motivate them to do anything you want because everybody's guilty at all times of something. And if you have somebody you don't want to be guilty, they can be free at all times. Does that make sense? Like you can control the entire population by having a murky rule set and a disproportionate application of justice. You can create any reality you want. Any Epsteins you want free and their client list, they will never come to light. Panama Papers never come to light anything having to do with rich and powerful people who do bad things will never come to light. Anybody who's at a disadvantaged position or somebody you want to go after, someone who's unfavorable, we can find something on them. We can find a way, a pathway to do lawfare and get them penalized according to whatever we want to do if we throw enough legalese at them. So there is a way if you have two things. One is an underfunded judicial system, and the other one is a bulky, burdensome, out-of-date legal system. So a series of laws that are overstuffed and a application of law that is overtaxed. With those two things, the system is exploitable. So I think traffic court is the best way to talk about this. Like how unfair traffic court could be, or low level disparity of outcomes. We would hope that the vast majority of, say, murders are adjudicated, but I would say that's not true either. I would say only about 60% of murder cases are ever closed, somewhere in that ballpark. A vast number of people who have been murdered, there is no legal repercussion for whoever did it. There's a huge disparity in rapes committed versus rapes adjudicated. There's a huge disparity in white collar crimes committed and their downstream repercussions compared to low level theft. Like imagine going into a 7-Eleven and robbing the cash register, okay? Stealing, say, $500, and what the implications are of that crime versus stealing $500 million through accounting, illegal accounting practices or insider trading. And then look at like insider trading as a function of hedge funds who effectively employ insiders and pay them off for information so that they can use that asymmetry of knowledge to exploit market functions with someone like Martha Stewart, who ends up serving actual prison time for like $60,000 of, illegal gains on some kind of insider trading thing she heard at a cocktail party.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is if the law, meaning what the legislative branch is making. So legislative branch creates the laws. Judicial branch decides on the cases. Very powerful separation of powers. If you had the same body create the laws and decide upon it, now you have a God-like section of the government. Mm-hmm. But my point is, there's lobbying, and the politicians themselves are, a large proportion of them are attorneys who have practiced, and they are incentivized by private enterprise, whether it's to do a certain thing while in office, meaning to be compensated with campaign finances, or a promise of a job, a cushy job out of office. So when they retire after they've written a bunch of cushy rules for the tobacco industry or whatever, then once they get out, guess who's going to hire them? Philip Morris, right? So you end up with a insider's game that's corruptible, and it induces corruption by the murkiness of the rule set, the fact that it's built that way. I'm going to go back, by the way. I don't know, Tucker, you've been going through the Three Body Problem trilogy. There's this moment that the cop says his rule is when something's fishy, I know somebody's up to something. I don't know if you remember that line.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. So when there's something really fishy, there's always somebody behind that thing. There's always something behind that fishiness. And what I'm saying is it shouldn't be a mystery where the poor and the downtrodden have maximum application of the legal system upon them. And then the rich and wealthy and networked have very few, if any, repercussions to anything they do, regardless of the size of the outcome. So there's something fishy here, and this is my determination, is that it's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's literally built that way. So back to traffic court. It is built such a way that they're using two things. One is we don't have enough resources to actually do what we're here to do. We're not here to find the truth. We're here to move people through the system as fast as we can. Truth be damned. And then two is, if you know how to play the game, you can get just about any outcome you want.
That's so interesting. Do you think it's possible that, like, because I don't disagree that necessarily you said it's like designed that way. But I'm trying to just kind of consider, well, just in the history of, America, 250-ish years of the system or whatever. What I'm trying to get to is, like, do you think it's likely that maybe something is designed, at the time it makes sense, and then just by the virtue of time, 100 years later, that same thing is suddenly exploitable in a way that, like, actually wasn't part of the original design, but
in a sense,
somebody discovers it and is like, oh my God, this actually, like, works really good in my favor. I can make a lot of money or whatever.
Yeah.
And hey, this is how it is.
There's a clear answer here. And it's analogous to Democrats and Republicans. So Democrats and Republicans are not the government. They're not at all a part of the government. They're private entities. We agree on that, right?
Yeah.
What about the Bar Association? What do you think the Bar Association is, and what does it do?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't actually think I've ever thought about it, but it's the affirming, like, process to get a certificate to practice law, right?
Yes.
And is it a government institution? I don't know.
There you go. You're getting there. What if
It is,
or what if I told you it's not?
It's not. It's a private institution.
Institution, a private organization. It's a database of members, and the members have been granted an accreditation, not from the government. By the way, this is not in existence in all 50 states. I've looked this up. There are some states that no longer use the Bar Association for their accrediting body for legal practice. But a vast majority, so if you want to Google it, I think it's probably 35, 40 states do use the Bar Association as a proxy for a government accreditation in order to have the legal capacity to practice law in their state. So same thing, by the way, medical. So if you want to go and have a medical license, a lot of states have a medical association that is a private institution that you have to pass their exam. So going back to your point, in the beginning, there was no accreditation. I don't think there was. You would just be somebody appointed or elected to this office of representation. You could create laws, and you didn't have to be a practicing attorney. You could sit on the bench and not be an attorney. You could argue law cases and be educated, self-educated. You didn't need a permission. At some point, we became a permission-oriented, regulated occupation. So if you go to a doctor now, you assume that doctor has graduated a medical school and taken some, certification exam to be legally authorized, regulated by the state that you're in to practice medicine. It's not just some guy who says, I know.
Right.
Okay.
I watched a YouTube video on how to do heart surgery. You're good. Correct. I can do it.
So you get two things in that. You get a little bit of protection. So, it used to be buyer beware, but now we took a little bit of that decision making out. Now you see the little plaque on the wall and you think, okay, somebody told this guy, or this lady, they're good enough. Yeah. And I trust that person. So now I'm at this office. I didn't have to do a bunch of research. I didn't have to ask them questions that I don't know the answer to anyway, and perhaps get tricked by somebody. But now let's go to the legal side. What if I said that there was an association created at some point, and I want to say it was 1800s. Hopefully somebody's fact checking me on this, where they created, so the bar comes from the British legal system, where you'd have your barristers, your attorneys, and your people who are going through the legal process. They would stand at a bar before the judges. So like a wooden bar. So this bar association, this comes back from, our colonial beginnings. And these people, this association, would then vet the people they would allow into their association as being, quote unquote, real attorneys. And once we got to the point of regulating attorneys, state by state, the power to authorize who is in and who is out of the club was given or repurposed by this association. And what I'm saying is this is my enemy. This is my target. I want to kill, metaphorically speaking, the bar association, and I want to replace it with a rank and file system of you start as a private and you go up through the ranks and you can be a general someday and sit on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But do away with this concept of a private organization a la Republicans and Democrats who are functionally taking the place of government. So people, when they think of Republicans and Democrats, they think that is the government, such that the people creating the elections and holding the elections and certifying the elections are not government people. They're people of a party. Like, imagine this is not part of my platform, but imagine this. Imagine the apparatus for holding an election would prohibit party participants who are in the election from holding the levers of power of organizing and implementing and certifying elections themselves. In other words, paraphrasing, I think it was Stalin who said, it matters not who votes on the election, it only matters who counts the votes.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine you have the people who are counting the votes and holding the votes. Let's go back to Bush v. Gore. A lot of this came down to who is in control of the Secretary of State, who is controlling each precinct, who is creating the interpretations of the rule sets, and it became a lawfare situation. So we don't know what the truth is. There is no truth in who won for Florida. There's so much complications in mail-in ballots, in recounts, in butterfly ballots, hanging chads, districts, having different rule sets and trying to accomplish a recount and not having enough time to do so. Supreme Court weighing in. There are so many instances of not the truth, but who's controlling the process to determine what the truth is, that it lays bare the fact that, and I'll bring this point up again, the powers that be, the two political parties, they will back into their position based on what serves them best, and they will flip-flop every time. So, Bush v. Gore, there was an instance where every vote must be counted. This was the Gore position. Every vote must be counted. So dimples, partially, hanging chads, ballots that weren't processed according to rules. Maybe you fill out one bubble and then you cross it out and you fill in the next bubble. And they were all trying to so they were excluded the first round of counts. a lot of these, I can't remember the terminology, but a ballot that wasn't executed according to, double votes or whatever, double votes. A lot of these were thrown out in the first round. And so the count changes every time you recount. Are you adding more ballots in? Well, yes, because every vote counts. But here's what happened. In the lawfare aspect, there were a bunch of mail-in ballots from service members overseas. And the service members overseas were vast majority in favor of Bush. But the Democrats had said every vote must count, and the Republicans were saying only the legal votes must count. So only the ones that weren't double votes, only the ones that didn't have an indistinguishing mark. You couldn't tell the truth of the intent of the voter. It's a bubble, it's partially pushed in, or a hanging chat, or all this. And then they inverted. So when it came to these military votes that were mail-in ballots that didn't have the proper postmark, or they came in after the fact, or they weren't quite right, now suddenly the party's inverted. And the Democrats didn't want these to count by the legal definition of the law, not the spirit. And the Republicans wanted the spirit of the law. These people voted, they should be counted. And that's what happened.
Wow.
What ended up happening, this very interesting story, Lieberman, who was the presidential nominee, went on, I think it was like some talk show, some Sunday talk show. Chris Matthews or something like that. I can't remember, some guy. Maybe that's wrong. But anyway, and he gets put on the spot as a representative of Gore, saying, you guys are saying all votes must count, but now your attorneys are fighting to throw out these military ballots because the postmark is after the date. What's up with that? And Lieberman historically says, you're right. We should honor our service members who are overseas and their commitment to fighting for the freedom of America, and we should count those ballots. And that was the end. I mean, Supreme Court does come in and stops a recount in Miami-Dade, I believe. They were trying to recount like 1.5 million votes in a certain amount of time. And the Secretary of State, I can't remember this lady's name, very famous Republican operative, and she wouldn't allow an extension of additional days for the recount, so she closed. Anyway, it turned into a political fight, is my point. It laid bare the fact that nobody's interested in justice. They want outcomes.
Yeah.
They want an outcome, and everybody will change their point of view, debate style, right? Am I pro or am I con? I'll argue it either way.
Yeah.
Just tell me what side I got.
Tell me what. Yeah.
Tell me what side I got to be on. I'll argue it.
Gnarly.
That's where we're at.
That's
So
cheerful.
But here's my point. Here's my point, guys. I don't think the people are consciously evil in that they're trying to do it this way. I think because of the rule set, we get an emergent phenomenon of humans who want to win the game. And they will have a pathway forward where they can win the game if they do this, and so they rationalize why they're going to do this. And over, this will repeat indefinitely until we get an accretion of lack of justice and lack of liberty. Until we get to giant douche and shit sandwich over and over and over again. And we're at this end stage where it's just every year it's going to be giant douche and shit sandwich forever. So now,
Wow.
now I'm envisioning, how do we change the rules? I'm not saying there's a person who should be in charge. I'm not saying there's an easy path, short and sweet. I'm not saying there's a quick fix. I'm saying there's got to be a better way. Knowing what we know with the technology we have today and learning from the past, we have an advantage. We should be able to figure out a more perfect union of rules. It's not ever going to be final. It's not the end game. The whole point is you'll never get to the end. But I do want to talk briefly about how to get there.
Just a time check here, because it is like a long episode. Is this like, you did say briefly, but is it something we want to maybe continue in part 4 of this topic?
I think it's just a concept. It should be 5 minutes at max.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Because I'd like your opinion. I mean, what do you guys, you like the idea? I mean, I assume you like this idea. It's kind of, it's different.
I love the idea of like trying something new. And again, like you said, it's not about like getting all the answers now before we start trying anything. Like I really like it's, at the same time, it's like, well, what are we trying? There should be a good outline. And that, I think that's what you presented is like a really good like idea. And here's where we could start with it. And so I really like that. It's easy, I guess, right? It's easy sometimes for someone to just talk or complain or, but the hard part is actually trying to like come up with an idea that could do something. So big applause to you to like, thank you for like thinking of something that could actually be tried,
We're talking about 2 hobbits sneaking into fucking Mordor.
Right.
The power disparity here is preposterous. I love this metaphor. I'm going to keep using this now.
Yeah.
Literally Lord of the Rings in that there's an imbalance. We have all the power on one side and an impossible task, and then tiny, tiny little lazy ass, furry-footed hobbits over here with no aspirations. They're nothing. They're little peas, tiny little infinitesimal little grains of sand. But that's exactly the solution.
Yeah.
That the Eye of Mordor does not see the tiny little hobbits coming for him. It's the only path forward, as far as I can tell. That's not violence. The only path forward that is not a violent path of a true violent revolution has to start this way. And so back to my pitch. It comes from a story. The idea should come from a story. It should be a narrative. It should be an entire pathway to see the full circle of events, how it could be dreamed before it is, and provided as an imagination. So my point is, the way I see this working, if at all, is like the Matrix. Okay, to awaken the minds, this is Plato's cave, re-envisioned the, nth time. I mean, just forever, and we're always going to be doing the same thing over and over again. Plato's cave concept of what is reality? How do you know reality? What I'm saying is the story lasts above any individual. The story lasts above the storyteller. The narrative is what will reach the subconscious of a million minds and get them to choose of their own volition which path they want to go to and unite in a common struggle. That's the level I want to play on. So I want to use this idea, create a narrative, create a story that injects this as part of the plot and can be transmitted as information virally throughout a population, and then have the action be emergent from the uptake of the concept itself.
Yeah.
Totally.
Stories and haikus. I can help with haikus part of it. Oh. But yeah.
Well, do you have a GPT? Do you have a GPT
quote about justice
or something? Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can wrap it up here. I don't know what we'll do next time. Maybe there's more to be picked through in the politics thing.
That's what I
have.
I'm done, guys. That was
okay.
That was my best shot right there.
Okay. Well, no, and it's I enjoyed it. Again, it's good. I think maybe we all agree. Like every so often, like dive into something that isn't of high interest. This is something new for me. So I appreciate all the detail you put forward and the ideas. And yeah, I'm very intrigued. And yeah, the idea of like writing a story to kind of help facilitate. Dude, totally on board. That sounds like right up my wheelhouse. So I love it. Yeah, so we'll figure out what to do for next episode. Not too worried about it right now. But yeah, good stuff. Thank you for listening. Sendingpoets@gmail.com to get a hold of us. And yeah, let's just see what ChatGPT says for a quote about justice here. So from Bartlett's, Oh, I think I've heard this before. It's I'll read the snippet about it. It's from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's from his letter from Birmingham jail, letter written in 1963. ChatGPT says that it powerfully conveys the interconnectedness of justice and the idea that the fight against injustice must be universal, as allowing it to persist in one place endangers justice everywhere. And the quote itself is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."